Good evening, everybody. Good evening, members. Welcome to this meeting of the Corporate Services, Climate Change and Scrutiny Management Call-in Committee. Obviously, we're in a new municipal year. Welcome back to returning members and a warm welcome to members who are new to this committee. It's probably unfortunate your first experience of corporate scrutiny is a call-in meeting, but you have to start. You have to start somewhere. But I'm sure we can navigate our way through. We don't have any members of the public present, so I won't do the usual directions to the facilities, other than say there is no fire alarm scheduled. So in the event that the alarm does go off, then we will leave by the signed exits. Apologies, we've had apologies from Councillor Coles, with Councillor Jane Burton substituting, from Councillor Widdowson, who's subbed by Councillor Orrell, and from Councillor Healy, who is subbed by Councillor Wan. Declarations of interest. Do any members have any interest they wish to declare relating to the matters on today's agenda? Councillor Merritt.
Could I just note that I'm a member of the York Bus Forum and its committee, and also of the Enhanced Partnerships Forum, not the board.
Yeah.
Obviously there are bus issues here. I do not think, however, they are prejudicial.
Yeah. No, that's fine. Thank you. I'm not seeing any other indications. Thank you. We have two sets of minutes to approve. Firstly, the minutes of the call-in meeting held on the 11th of March. For those members who were present at that meeting, does anyone have any matters of accuracy? If not, I'm happy to move approval. Members in favour? Yeah, thank you. Then we have the minutes of the very brief meeting held on the 7th of May. There's just one issue with the first sentence of the minutes. The chair opened the meeting by stating he had been advised by officers that new information unrelated to the grounds for call-in had come to light. I didn't actually use the words unrelated to the grounds for call-in, but I said new information has come to light, and then I invited Claire Fold to come to the table, who then explained in more detail. So I think just the words unrelated to the grounds for call-in, I think if they can be removed and reinserted elsewhere to make it clear that when the officer gave the update, those were the words that she used. That's okay. But other than that, a slight change. Members happy to approve those minutes as well. Councillor Crawshaw.
Thanks, Chair, and I completely accept I wasn't at that meeting. I do think it's important that it's clear that the reasons that were brought forward were unrelated to the grounds of the call-in. So long as you're suggesting that is made very clear that was the reason for the deferral, then I don't see that there's a problem with that.
Yeah, I was just suggesting that not to remove those words, but to relocate them, because that's not what I said. It's the explanation given by the officer. Okay, so with that amendment, Councillor Eyre.
As long as it's made clear that was the view of officers that presented the paper, because it wasn't your view and it wasn't the view. The committee didn't take a view on that. The officer suggested it wasn't related to the call-in. I disagreed. Many other people disagreed, but we don't need to get into that.
No,
the officer did say that.
Yeah, so we'll have a factual account of what was said, and not whether individuals agreed with that statement or not. Okay, so with that relocation of those words, we're happy to sign off those minutes. Okay, next item is public participation. We have no public participation today, which brings us on to the main item of business, which is the called in item on the bus shelter and other infrastructure advertising contract. Obviously, those members who were here at the meeting in May will be aware of the background to this item. Just in the interest of clarity, this is a new call-in. Some of the grounds for call-in are similar to those that appeared in the call-in in May, but we're here to discuss the grounds on which this new decision has been called in, not to discuss grounds for calling which are no longer relevant because a different decision was taken. In terms of how we will proceed with this item for the benefit of members who are new to this committee and perhaps new to the calling process, we're here to hear from the calling in member and to question the calling in member to determine whether the grounds for calling are whether you think they are sound and whether you think there has been a breach in the principles of decision making. We're not here to debate and discuss whether we agree with a particular decision or whether we would have taken a different decision. It's about the basis and the principles on which the decision was taken. And at the end of the meeting, all of us will be asked to indicate whether we believe there has been a breach in those decision-making principles. Within the papers for this meeting, there is a confidential annex. So can I ask that if members have a hard copy of that confidential annex on the table, please be mindful about how you read it and how you can ensure that it's not visible to the cameras around the room as best you can. When we come to have a question and answer session with the calling in member and with the executive member, if any members have questions they wish to ask that relate explicitly to the contents of that confidential, restricted report, if you indicate that you wish to ask a question that does relate explicitly to content that is in that restricted report and is not in the public report, we may and are likely to need to move to closed session in order to deal with those questions. But if I can ask members if they wish to ask a question either of the calling in member or the executive member that is likely to lead to a discussion about details of the confidential paper that you indicate that's what you wish to do, we can then take a decision to go into closed session to deal with those specific questions rather than you ask them and then it's too late to rewind, as it were. But though there is a fair bit of information and detail in the public report in terms of value of advertising contracts and other information that may mean we don't need to go into closed session. But if we do, we can. But I'd rather we have as much of the debate and discussion in public as is possible. So how this will work, I'll invite the calling in member to come to the table to speak for a maximum of 10 minutes. That's not to suggest that the entire 10-minute allocation needs to be used, but there is a maximum of 10 minutes available for the calling in member, Councillor Smalley, to expand on the reasons for the call-in and why they believe the core principles have been breached. There'll then be a maximum of 20 minutes for members of the committee to pose questions to Councillor Smalley. When we've concluded that section, I'll invite Councillor Lomas to respond to the alleged breaches set out in the call-in. And again, Councillor Lomas will have up to 10 minutes. There'll then be a similar 20-minute period during which members can pose questions of Councillor Lomas. In the event that there are technical questions on which officer input is required, then there'll be the opportunity for Claire Fall to join us at the table to deal with any of those questions. I'll then invite Councillor Smalley to come back and sum up for a maximum of 5 minutes. Executive member will then have an opportunity for a 5-minute summation as well. And then I will invite members of the committee to make any observations that they wish to make. And you each have up to 5 minutes to make your observations. But again, no compulsion to use the full allocation. And then we'll all be asked to indicate whether the core principles have been breached or have not been breached. We'll take a vote, and that will be the end of the meeting. So if I can invite Councillor Smalley to join us at the table, please. Welcome. So, Councillor Smalley, you have up to 10 minutes to say anything that you wish to say, to expand on the reasons for calling as set out in the Appendix 3 of the report. So, over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for explaining that. This is actually my first call in as well in my 5 years as a councillor, either this side of the table or the other side. So, you know, despite rumours, I'm not a troublemaker. I happen to feel fairly strongly about this issue, and thank you very much for all your time today. I guess firstly, just setting out some of the history, and I guess congratulating the executive on listening. In the first instance, we are pleased that, you know, due to us asking questions and doing the due diligence necessary regarding the tendering process, that decision was withdrawn and remade at executive. That stopped this council making a potentially unlawful decision with regard to that contract. So starting with the good news, however, we've decided to continue with our call-in for a few reasons, and I guess they're set out on page 216 of your agenda packs today. I guess firstly, and both of those reasons fall within how the executive decision does not follow the principles of good decision making as set out in the Constitution, as the definition within the council's constitution. The first part of that is with regard to considering the views of the public. This is not an emergency decision. This didn't need to be made quickly. There was 12 months lead in time. There was the time that the scoping exercise was undertaken. There was time to consider the views of the public afterwards, but no consultation took place at all with the public with regards to what they'd like to see the contract deliver. That includes obviously the advertising, and I think you just need to look at some of the press coverage around the restrictions of advertising on certain products, through to potentially exploring the commitment of replacing glass with plexiglass. I'm sure we all know as ward councillors, one of the things that puts people off bus travel and travelling sustainably is the dreadful condition of some of our bus shelters. Sort of whether they're JCDecaux shelters or council ones or parish council ones, smash shelters really do put off people from using the bus. And increasing the frequency of graffiti removal, like it or not, they are a target for graffiti, and that is something that equally wasn't explored. And there was no consultation at all with parish councils. I guess bus shelters in the city are either the responsibility of the city council, our contracted partners, or parish councils. And there's a missed opportunity there to consider the views of parish councils and potentially get them on board with improving the standard of shelters across the city. Finally, and I guess in my view more importantly, is taking a failure to take into account all relevant matters before making this decision. The report didn't set out the difficulties that previous applicants have had in applying for freestanding digital boards. So BT a few years ago during the last administration tried quite hard to erect really similar displays and advertising displays, which obviously had other functions that BT were providing. And as far as we can work out, only one was given planning permission, which would make the proposals within the paper and before the executive incredibly hard to deliver through the planning process, and would of course therefore change the amount of advertising revenue that would be likely at all. So I mean, that seems like quite a substantial sort of omission really in terms of considering how actually likely it is to deliver that. And given that this decision is contributing to the council's budget and financial sustainability, it does seem a bit of a glaring omission. There's no consideration for the reputational risk of City of York Council and its relationship with key stakeholders in the city. The decision that executive has taken would in sense mean that sort of local institutions like York's Chocolate Story couldn't advertise, I don't know, a half-term half-term discount to York patrons. That would break the rules as set out. And obviously, chocolate has been made in the city for just under 300 years. It's something we're known for, and I think sort of essentially sticking two fingers up at quite a large employer still in the city, and a large part of our history was a reputational risk, and in some ways that risk has already been established with the significant media attention we've seen since this all started being discussed. And then finally, before I wrap up, the climate emergency. I think the council's administration, the previous administration, is making great strides in tackling the climate emergency. Now we hear from the Lord Mayor before every full council. How many days we have left to declare that commitment. I think that's a helpful reminder to not consider the climate impacts of this decision. The boards very similar to this that were erected in Manchester use the same amount of energy per year as 3 households, and we're going to erect these all over the city. It's within taking into account all relevant matters. Well, I think that's me finished, and obviously happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. So, members, we have up to 20 minutes for any questions you wish to pose to Councillor Smalley on the call-in ground set out at Appendix 3. I'm not seeing any indications. No. Thank you. You may return to the public gallery. Okay, so Councillor Lomas, you've been here before, you know the routine. You have 10 minutes to respond to the alleged breaches set out in the call-in notice.
Thank you, Chair. I'll first address some of the things that Councillor Smalley raised that weren't in the published grounds for call-in, because I think it's important that I address them since he has raised them, even though they're not part of the decision-making. The first one was the notion that the change to the decision-making at executive was as a result of the initial call-in. We've made that clear quite a few times that it wasn't. That an error was uncovered, which officers brought to our attention and we addressed. And I don't think we should be discussing that anymore, because it's been dealt with quite comprehensively. One of the other things that Councillor Smalley has mentioned is local institutions like the York chocolate story, and I believe that he's referring to the advertising policy that was passed at the original executive meeting. That was not changed as a result of our further executive meeting, and that policy hasn't been brought to call-in. So I would urge members to disregard that. It's not been brought to call-in. That decision isn't under question, and so it's irrelevant. Similarly, with consideration of climate emergency, that's not been covered in the grounds for call-in. I don't understand the relevance of those comments. But turning to the things that were in the call-in. So the first ground to call-in is that the report didn't set out the difficulties that previous applicants who have applied for freestanding digital advertising boards have had in getting their applications approved by our planning department. So if you look in the executive report, paragraphs 3, 6, 7, 23, 28 and 51 all cover that very specific issue, talking about the legal risks, the legislation, the financial risks, the installation risks, and indeed the reputational risks. So I think comprehensively there, just in the executive report, in those paragraphs, it is clear that we did take it into account. And of course, at call-in, the question is not whether Councillor Smalley would have made the same decision with the same information. The question is whether we made our decision in a proper way. And I would say that we've given evidence that we have. There is also a reference I could give you relating to information in the pink papers, but I won't do that here because it would be inappropriate. But if you do need me to elaborate further, then I can do so in a closed session. There are two types of advertising that would require planning. That is the digital bus shelters and the freestanding units. And obviously, in the report, it is quite clear that any revenue that we get is subject to planning, and that will affect the revenue that we get. And we've never had a planning application for digital advertising on a bus shelter. So that's completely untested. And I cannot say, and no member of this committee can say, how a planning committee would approach that. But there is precedent in other heritage cities where that kind of advertising has been installed. And I think it's important to note that we already have backlit paper advertising in many of our bus stops, and digital advertising would be similar to that. There's then a note that there's no consideration for the reputational risk and our relationship with key stakeholders in the city, such as manufacturing and tourism stakeholders. Again, there is evidence in the pink papers that I can refer you to if you wish me to do so, and we'll go into a closed session and I will take you through that. But I would note that we have absolutely taken that into consideration, and there is evidence for that. The next ground for calling is about consultation with the public, and then separately a joined up approach with parish councils. So I'll deal with those two separately. Consultation with the public, first of all. Consultation with the public on tender specifications is quite tricky because we are accountable for the outcomes, but obviously we need to make sure that we are getting what residents want out of contracts that we make on their behalf. We are open about the fact we are entering into arrangements and that allows people to comment on them. But outside of specific contracts to deliver services direct to residents, we don't usually have that level of consultation with the public on contract specification. What I can say is that the biggest challenge around the bus stop contract is about accessibility of bus stops and the related infrastructure. And we have been specifically asked by disabled people's organisations to stop going to them and asking them the same questions over and over again for a different purpose. We've had consultations via the transport strategy. We've now got a bus accessibility task and finish group that is reporting back to the enhanced bus partnership on accessibility of buses and their related infrastructure, including bus stops. And all of that information will be fed in, but ultimately the public consultation will come at the planning stage when the public and all stakeholders will absolutely have their say on whether they want to have this type of bus stop installed. We have been working, as I say, with disabled people's organisations through our Access Forum, with all our partners on making buses and bus stops more accessible, and all of the feedback from that will be fed in. It is absolutely right to say that parish councils do operate some bus stops, and if any parish council wanted to be part of a contract for advertising on their bus stops, they would have to make those arrangements themselves because they are the operators of the bus stops, not CYC, so we wouldn't be able to go into a contract on their behalf. That would be completely wrong of us. I also wanted to make just a couple of other points. because there's been a lot of public chat about this contract. So there are two providers of this kind of contract that cover 98% of the local authorities in the UK. And we have had a contract with one of those two providers for a great deal of time now. And it's absolutely about time that we change that contract and refresh it. There's been a lot of discussion publicly about various things that have been said about different providers and different opportunities, and none of that is correct. It is the case that these are the two providers that could deliver this kind of service for us. And if we don't have a contract to operate our bus stops, then the alternative is that we as a city council would have to take back those bus stops. We would have to provide bus stop and bus stand infrastructure ourselves, and then we would have to operate and maintain that. And that would be at significant cost to us. So it's very important to us that we do have a contract and that we get it right. But I hope that I have explained why the grounds for calling have not been met.
Thank you, Councillor Lomas. So members, we now have a similar opportunity for you to pose any questions you wish. Councillor Rowley.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Lomas, for your reply. Just picking up on one of the points that was made by Councillor Smalley when he spoke, and he talked about the option of plexiglass over standard glass in the construction of these bus shelters. Is that something that, as an executive member and as a local authority, we can have negotiations with when we're looking at the specific spec of an application that goes to planning, and also could it potentially be something that a planning committee might want to add as a condition?
Yes, thanks, Councillor Rowley. It is something we've been discussing, and it has come up as part of a lot of the conversations I had about accessibility of bus transport. That anything other than glass in a bus shelter can be problematic from a being able to see through it perspective. And anyone who has a bus shelter near them that's been replaced with plexiglass will know that it soon becomes very difficult to see through it. And in fact, some of the discussions that we've been having in the accessibility task and finish group are about, is it better to have glass, not glass at all, about the different challenges posed by plexiglass, by other materials. So any discussions around that would have to balance the, I suppose, the robustness, is that the word I want to use? Robustness of the material versus the accessibility of being able to, you know, be aware of your surroundings when at a bus stop.
Sorry,
Yeah.
So essentially the answer to my question is yes, it is something that could be discussed.
Yes.
Both at pre-planning and also at planning. Thank you, Councillor.
Has been and is being.
Thank you. Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Chair. First question, before I get into the question, is regarding confidentiality. So one of the questions is about who was consulted as part of this process. That information is currently in the confidential annex. I don't believe that information is confidential, so I'd like a view on whether that question can be asked in public.
I think, given that it's in the pink papers, I think we will. I agree. It would have been ideal to have had a confidential annex that had maybe some redaction so that it was easy to see what was commercial in confidence and what wasn't. As things stand, I think we have to consider everything that's in the pink papers as confidential. So if there are questions relating to the information details within that report, then we'll need to move into closed session. So I'll make a note. Is there a question you'd like to ask that isn't in the confidential?
There is one about that. I might try and reword that question to see if I can get around the paper.
Careful.
So the simple one is, so the original paper that went to executive, the only officers that were named as part of that report were the Assistant Director for Policy and Strategy and the Director of Public Health. The second one that came back reassuringly had the same officer, Policy and Strategy, also Head of Procurement, Head of Legal, and the Monitoring Officer. Were they the only officers that inputted into this particular report?
I think for that, I'd have to ask Claire Fell to come up and answer. Tim.
So Claire Fell, who was the author of both the first and the second reports.
Yeah, thank you. So in the consultation section of the executive report, you'll see a list of other officers who are involved in a task and finish group that helped us set out the original specification and understand the impacts and the issues surrounding bus shelters. So we had highways. I'm going to have to get it in front of me now as well. Highways, transport, planning, access, involved in a task and finish group that we ran throughout the period of the market appraisal and then up to the point of April, where we looked at really the issues surrounding the initial contract, while we might change some of the specification and what other opportunities there were, what planning's views were on digital and what kind of specifications they would want to see, who they would like us to talk to through the market appraisal, which is the pink paper. So yeah, there were more officers involved in the development of the policy that led to the paper, but not in the actual paper itself.
Okay.
And then my second one, because it follows on from that, which is try and get around it, is that it does then say that paragraph 44 helpfully leads into it that there was consultation with key stakeholders. I was going to ask the executive member, getting around it, whether she believes that all the relevant key stakeholders that needed to input into that appraisal were included in that report.
Without naming who they
Without naming who they are, do you believe that all the key stakeholders who should have inputted into that report did so?
Into which report, sorry?
The market appraisal.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Waller.
Thank you, Chair. Just in relation to materials that are utilised at the bus stops. I did email Claire Fell on the 8th of May in relation to ongoing discussions that have taken place following vandalism of plate glass, and Councillor Fenton and I have been sweeping up where they have been broken late at night in order to make some safety improvements. But it's in relation to the choice of materials. I appreciate some discussion about plexiglass, but there are residents who live close to bus stops who find that if a particularly opaque material is selected, it does make it difficult for them to safely emerge from their driveway. So it's factoring those choices into this new contract, because we've been frequently told as ward councillors that, well, this new contract is coming along, it's something we can look at. And I would wrap in the discussion about potentially building CCTV into the shelters. It's been an ongoing issue, particularly on Foxwood Lane, where there's been from time to time hotspot issues, and therefore it's understanding how this opportunity to ensure that responsiveness to residents' requests and those come through ward councillors, how that was being wrapped into this new contract.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Councillor Waller. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of issues around what material, particularly the sides of any bus shelters are made from. And you're absolutely right. It's got to be something that can be safely seen through for everybody's safety. And equally, we want something that's robust enough to withstand a level of misuse, shall we say. That's the first I've heard about CCTV in bus stops, and that's something we can definitely go away and look at and investigate. But absolutely, if anyone's got thoughts about how we can better serve residents through any of our contracts, never mind the bus stop one, be really glad to hear them. But I'm not sure that that's part of the grounds for calling or the reasons why we're here. You know, really happy to talk to you separately about specific issues around how we can improve things for residents. But I'm not really sure how that fits in with the grounds for calling.
Thank you. Councillor Nelson.
Thank you. As a new member to this committee and new to the call-in process, I was just wondering, because most of the questions that Councillor Lomas has been asked so far seem to be about the materials of bus stops and the details of what bus stops are made of and these kind of, you know, small details within this contract. I appreciate that we all feel quite strongly about, you know, how our bus stops look and what they're made of. But my understanding was you can't call in a decision just to ask loads of questions about the very detailed, like what materials bus stops are made of. And actually those decisions can be had separately and are nothing to do with this call-in, but that the actual thing of the call-in is the issue that Councillor Smalley has raised was about whether or not there's consultation with the public about details of what bus stops are made of. So it seems to me that it's completely inappropriate that we're spending time discussing, even though I also feel very strongly about what our bus stops are made of, whether things are made of plexiglass, whether things are see-through, whether there's CCTV. It seems like this isn't the forum for those conversations, if I understand the call-in process.
Well, looking at the reasons for calling, one of the boxes ticked relates to having taken into consideration all relevant factors. Now, some members, there are some factors that they believe are relevant, and I suppose what they're doing is questioning whether those factors have been taken into consideration.
So can any member have any relevant matter that they can now think or now bring up, or do we have to concentrate on the reasons in this call-in form?
So,
4A says about no consultation taking place with the public about what they would like to say. It's not an open forum, as far as I understand, for councillors now to have a discussion about plexiglass.
Hang on. It's the grounds for calling are as published in Appendix 3. Obviously, some of the boxes are ticked that relate to specific broad principles, and then further on, there's an explanation as to the nature of some of the issues that the call-in members believe are material issues, which they consider, on the basis of the information they've seen, haven't been given due consideration. The whole point of this question and answer session is to explore those issues and seek confirmation and assurance that those issues have been or are to be taken into consideration. But so we're now at the stage of questions to the executive member. This isn't we're not in a broad discussion forum. This is a question and answer session to the executive member.
Chair, if I may, Chair, I have answered now two separate members about what bus stops are made out of, and I have confirmed I did indeed take it into account when we were looking at the contract, and that we've taken into account the views of many members of the public through the forums that we have in place. Yeah, their views on bus stop design. I can answer it again, but what Councillor Waller was specifically talking about was specific bus stops and specific issues he has had with those bus stops. And as I say, I'm really happy to take that. But I imagine all of us have got stories we can tell about bus stops. I know I do in my ward, and we may be here a long time.
Well, we've got 20 minutes for this particular session, so we have a limited amount of time. Are you keeping tab on?
There isn't actually time, Jane.
All right, yes, but I think in this interest of consistency, we have said that it's 20 minutes per the executive member and 20 minutes for the call-in member. So I'm looking for hands, anyone who hasn't spoken yet. Councillor Melly.
Thank you, Chair. This is also my first call in on this side of the committee. I've called in before, but I'm also trying to get my head around the process. So one of the reasons given for the call in was that in making the decision, the executive did not meaningfully consider all alternatives and where reasonably possible, consider the views of the public. Now you explained that it's not usual to consult on these sorts of decisions, but then you also said that you wanted to hear ideas of how to improve bus stops for residents through contracts. Isn't that the purpose of consultation? If you wanted those views, can you tell us more about why you didn't consult, more than just that it isn't usual?
So I think there's a difference between having a specific and a specific going out for consultation on a contract and seeking views from people who are involved along the way on the process. So absolutely, I want to absolutely be clear that we are taking into account everything that has been said to us as part of the massive consultation on transport across the city, which is one of the biggest consultations we've done. We're taking into account all the views that are expressed to us. And indeed, we make decisions in public for a reason, so that people can talk to us about it. But none of that is about whether we go out to tender for this contract or not. That's about the things that we want to make sure we achieve once we have a contractor in place to provide the service that we're contracting. So I don't want anyone to go away with the idea that we haven't been hearing from the public about what they want in terms of bus stops and bus infrastructure in the city. We absolutely have been hearing that, and we want to, and I'm really happy to speak to any members about specific issues that they have with the contract and how it currently operates. And I always am about any contracts that we have in place. And this is probably one of the contracts that we've made that has got most public airing because of the issues that we talked about earlier. So there can be no doubt in people's minds that it's happening. And what I'm saying is it's not usual to go out with a formal consultation to the general public on a tender specification.
Councillor Crawshaw.
Thanks, Chair. I'm not sure whether this is for yourself, Councillor Lomas, or something for Claire Fole, because I just want to understand on a sort of technical basis the relationship between the management of city centre bus stops and the bus stops that are owned by parish councils, and the extent to which this contract and this procurement exercise covers the difference between those two. Because if I've understood it correctly, this is a procurement purely for the city centre bus stops, or the bus stops that are operated by JC&Co currently, and that is being re-procured, but that doesn't and wouldn't ever cover the parish council bus stop. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So this contract is for the current bus stop, well, the bus stops that the city council is responsible for operating, set out on the routes that the council is responsible for operating, which may be on land that the parish is responsible for, but they are not responsible for those bus shelters. They remain the responsibility of the council. It's also got provision for future opportunity. So as York Central develops, as maybe the city centre changes its makeup through Castle Gateway area, all of that potential future development over the next 15 or so years, there's opportunity for the successful contractor to also take on new bus shelters. But the parish council bus shelters that the parishes are responsible for operating, that they have requested and are therefore responsible for operating. I think it's the Local Government Act that allows them to do that. They are completely separate from this contract. But this contract doesn't preclude them from developing their own arrangements with any media operator that they wish.
Yeah.
So just to be completely clear, there's nothing in this contract that would impose something on the parish councils in terms of the bus shelters that they operate.
Not on the bus shelters they operate, exactly. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Orrell.
Just sort of following up on that, Chair. One of the aspects of the calling was no joined up approach with parish councils. Now, you said that you've been hearing a lot of responses from the public. Have you had any responses from parish councils?
No.
Thank you.
Perhaps because they weren't asked.
I've got councillor Eyre.
That was actually going to be my specific question, was what conversations did you have with the parish councils about whether they might be interested in handing over any of the bus shelter responsibilities they had in return for an increased value to the contract, etc. That I'm not aware of how many bus shelters there are outside the contract. This contract is about 110, I think, which is a fraction of them. I had two questions I was always going to ask was what consideration was given of expanding the number of bus shelters included in the contract, and specifically those ones held by the parish council, nothing imposing on them, but actually saying, would you be interested in handing over the maintenance to the council so that we can include it in this tender contract? I have no idea whether they would say yes or no, but did you ask them and what consideration was given to that?
We didn't ask the parish councils if they wanted us to take over responsibility for their bus shelters, because that's not something that we would want to do given our financial circumstances, which I think we've been quite open and honest about in recent months, that we wouldn't want to take on any more financial liability in that way. So no, we didn't ask them if they wanted us to take on responsibility for their bus
But the
shelters.
point of this contract was to advertising
Sorry,
revenue.
councillor Eyre, if you've got a
Yeah.
question, if you can indicate to me, because I've got others waiting.
Just to follow up on that, it's not about taking on the maintenance liability. It's about increased advertising opportunity for those. They may have said to you, we'll give you £15,000 for each of those parish council bus shelters.
So I think we've had the response, which was, as councillor Lomas has given. Is this a supplementary or a new question?
Just to ask, this is just to select the supplier of the bus stops and who maintains them. So if in future a parish council would like to change their bus stop over to a council one, that would just move under this contract. So I would assume that's not the question we're asking, but is that right?
If we took on liability for bus shelters and we had a contract in place, then that's something that we would absolutely do. But for the shelters that are currently the responsibility of parish councils to be included in this contract, they would have to be our responsibility, which would be our liability, because if we don't manage to let the contract, then we have to maintain all of those bus shelters. So hopefully I've explained there quite plainly what the dilemma is. But none of this precludes the parish councils from making their own arrangements if they want to with a provider.
Thank you. Did you have a question, councillor Nelson?
Thank you. If I've understood what you said earlier, Claire, about the parish councils and the bus stops that they maintain are bus stops that they've requested to maintain. So part of the grounds for this call in it is, have we asked the parish councils to give us back bus stops that they in the first place asked us if they could maintain?
Yes.
Okay, so but they didn't, they're not lumped with them, they have at some point, or the parish councils that run those bus stops have at some point requested to run those bus stops as part of their roles as parish councils.
Yeah, they've requested to have a bus stop that they will then maintain. So the bus shelter or the bus stop didn't exist before they asked to have one in that particular area, that they then are responsible for maintaining.
Thank you.
I'm conscious I think we've covered the question on opportunities for parish councils. I'm conscious that there are other issues other members may wish to raise, and we are limited for time. So I've got Councillor Merritt, and then Councillor Eyre, and then Councillor Melly. Yeah, please do. All right, okay. Councillor Eyre, are we moving on?
There was a quick question about whether we're certain that all of those parish council maintained bus shelters are not liable for double taxation claims, in which case we already have the maintenance issues and liabilities.
I would need to check that. I don't understand the question. I didn't know we were taxed on bus shelters.
It's a parish council taxation issue, but it can be dealt with offline, I'm sure. Councillor Melly.
Thank you, Chair. I was just wondering if I could ask executive member to clarify something that you said prior to questions, which I think relates to both the call-in reasons, both to do with where reasonably possible considering views of the public and also taking accountable relevant matters. As one of the reasons why you felt those call-in reasons weren't valid, you mentioned consultation as part of the planning process. I was just wondering if you could explain more about how you feel that addresses these two reasons for call-in.
So if there is a proposal to change the bus shelter advertising to digital, and as part of this contract, the intention is that some of them will move to digital advertising, that's subject to planning. And as you know, there has to be consultation as part of the planning process. So the specifics on which bus stops might change to digital advertising and what that would look like, etc., would all be subject to the planning process, and that obviously contains consultation.
Okay, but that consultation as part of the planning process will only be to ascertain views of the public in relation to planning matters. It won't be able to take into account any of the other, I can't remember what the wording was, relevant matters as part of this executive decision. Is that right?
No, I think what I was referring to there was that there's a lot of the specific concerns that have been mentioned are around the construction of the bus shelter, the digital advertising being different to what is there now, whether it's relevant in terms of this being a heritage city that's been mentioned. So all of those things are planning matters. The access issues that might or might not be caused by the design and construction of the bus shelter. They're all things that are planning issues, so that all of those things would be picked up in that consultation. So as when you are letting a contract like this, you're not going to give everyone a rundown of exactly what might happen to very specific bus shelters. It's not feasible or possible to do that. So that it wouldn't be a meaningful consultation in any case, because we'd just be saying, well, it might change or it might not change in a number of ways. But when it comes to the planning process, that'll be very specific, because it'll be on those, this bus shelter is proposed to change in this way. What do you think about it?
Thank you for elaborating. That is much clearer now. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, so I did say I would come back at the end to ask if any members had any questions they wish to raise that relate to material in the restricted annex. Does anyone have anything they wish to ask relates explicitly to material in the restricted annex that they haven't had the opportunity to raise in a roundabout kind of way in the session we've just had? No. Okay. Thank you, Councillor Lomas. So we now move on to the summing up. So if I can invite Councillor Smalley to return, please. And you have up to 5 minutes to add anything you wish in relation to your call-in request.
I'll be very, very brief because and people have better places to be, etc. But and to thank everyone for their time this evening. I think this whole discussion, as I've sort of been sat there listening, has sort of proved the point really, and has sort of said it better than I could summarise in terms of there were many factors that weren't considered, but in particular material key factors that weren't taken into account. I guess within the consultation element, with my thinking back to when when I was sort of sat around the exec table, if we were consulting on swimming pool places, the council is an operator of swimming pools, but when we did that, we spoke with other people that run swimming pools. If you're reviewing bus shelters and looking at a contract like the executive were, why wouldn't you speak to those that also run bus shelters? And the same with the playing pitch provision. The council owns and maintains and runs football pitches, but when we were looking at that provision and consulting on what the council was going to do with our contract, we spoke with other people that ran such facilities. So I think that's addressing the parish council element. It would have been sensible when looking at the contract to consult with parish councils and the public. I think the idea that the public should only really be allowed to engage when it's at the planning stage in terms of the formal planning consultation is sort of completely balmy. It'd be like, when we were building and going ahead with Clifton Library as a project, it'd be like saying, we're not doing any consultation because you'll get a formal window in which to share your views at the planning stage. I mean, that's, it's just nonsense. You wouldn't do it in any other world. And yet when it comes to bush shelter provision, that seems to be sort of perfectly acceptable as a form of consultation. So I think from that perspective, and the not considering material impacts that should have been sort of thought about during this executive decision. And I think, obviously the executive member has made assurances that some things were thought about, but it is a sort of promise of we did it attitude. It should have been within the paper, it should have been fleshed out. And then finally, I'm going to go back to my parish councils and suggest that we approach Nestle and see how much they'll pay us to exclusively advertise Kit Kats all over Rockland and Clifton without and nothing else. And it's been an excellent suggestion today. Thank you so much, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Smalley. So I now invite Councillor Lomas to make any summing up remarks that she wishes, and you also have up to 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. I'll try not to use any language that's oppressive in my summing up. I know, of course, everyone right across the council, right across the city will want to have input into every decision we make, but that's just not practicable. I know that everyone in this room wants to have input into a decision that affects all of our wards. That's completely understandable. And I know that, my colleagues on this side of the table who've recently left administration have struggled to see the difference between calling being about the process by which a decision is made and just them not liking decisions that we've made since we've taken over administration. But the call-in is about the process of decision making. And as set out in the grounds for call-in, there are 2 grounds for call-in, and I've refuted both of them comprehensively, giving references where required from the reports that all of you have access to. So it is unfortunate that that Councillor Smalley doesn't place the same weight on keeping children safe and healthy as we do, but that's a decision for him. We made the decision about the advertising policy. That is not part of the call-in, and the call-in is purely about the advertising contract and the way that we made the decision on the advertising contract. And what I will say about the advertising contract decision is that we're so transparent about it that when it became apparent that there was an issue with the initial decision, we vacated it. And we were very open and honest about that. And then we were open and honest about the need to make a different decision. So there's nothing about this which is us making decisions in secret. We've been open and honest about it, but when you're entering into a sensitive commercial contract arrangement, you're not going to be able to share everything with everyone at all stages of that. That is the situation that we are in. But there are 2 grounds for calling. And it is absolutely clear on ground 4C. I've given you the references in the report where it makes it clear and evident that we did take into account the planning issues. Myself and Claire have given you information about consideration of the reputational risk and the relationship with stakeholders. And on 4A, I've explained that there hasn't been any specific formal consultation on this contract because that would have been very difficult to do. However, we are taking into account all of the views that we've collected from the public about issues relating to bus stops, and there has been a lot collected recently because we've specifically gone out and sought it. when looking at this contract. And Claire gave you examples of the group that she set up to make sure that that had all been taken into account. I believe that the grounds for calling are refuted. But of course, I'm very happy to talk to any councillors about any of the decisions that we're making and any of the issues that they're facing in their wards. And I'll be very happy to talk to anyone and everyone about the issues relating to the construction materials for bus stops as we go forward with this.
Thank you. So we've heard from the calling in member and the executive member. So now it's a point in the meeting where I invite committee members to make any contributions they wish to make before I then move to asking each member of the committee whether they consider the core principles have been breached or not. So we're now at the stage of contributions, observations from members of the committee, and you have each up to 5 minutes. Councillor Merritt.
I think it's been quite interesting tonight. There's been an extensive set of questions from the caller in and the other side of the table and from our own side of the table. And the more those questions have been asked, the more clear it is that the issues have been considered in depth. In terms of the information that was put in the call-in, I think as the executive member, Councillor Lomas, has very adequately demonstrated by referencing the various sections of the report, those issues were considered very, very clearly. Comment was suggested that the risks from planning were not addressed, and yet that in terms of the risks and mitigation, what are two of the biggest ones? Financial risks, item 3, failure to realise. Item C, installation risks, constraints imposed by conservation areas. It's all there. I have a real sense that the person who submitted this call-in hadn't read the report, or if they read it, it didn't alter their preconceptions. This frankly is a completely unjustified call-in, and as I think has been demonstrated, as I said very clearly. In terms of consultation, it's very clear that the design of shelters is something that is going to be consulted on, and that will be the key opportunity to influence those designs and their acceptability. And it is important that that happens, very important. Members of the public, everybody has an interest in those shelters, who uses them or passes them, or where those shelters are part of their neighbourhoods, how they think they influence the city. So that is a very important consideration, but has clearly been catered for in these papers, as is very clear in the public annex, in the equalities impact assessment, section 5.1. So as I say, I think this has been an unnecessary call-in, and I hope that we do reject it.
Thank you, Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Chair. I'll endeavour to be brief and focus on the reasons for calling on page 216. So the first was around planning. And I have to say, I was genuinely surprised that the exec member said that she believed that all the key stakeholders who needed to be consulted had been consulted. I think anybody who's read the background report, anybody who would read the background report would find it quite clear that not all the key stakeholders who should have been inputting into this decision did input into the decision. I think that is something that will turn around and bite the executive member when it comes back to the planning arena, if it ever gets to the planning arena. I think that particular comment is distinctly problematic. I think that in itself, the people who inputted into this and the people who didn't input into this, though we're not allowed to say it in public, is the very simple and the key reason why this calling should definitely succeed. I mean, there were glaring omissions in that particular information that will come back. In terms of consultation, I fully agree with the sort of comments and questions that Councillor Melly was alluding to. Planning isn't the correct way to deal with this in terms of consultation. That will be too late in the design. This is a contract of over £5.4 million in value. It will be locked in for 15 years It is absolutely imperative that we get this right at this particular point. And I take on board the comments from Councillor Merritt that there will be opportunity to input into design, but this tender spec will lock in so much around that particular issue. The more we can lock in during that contract, the more we can get them to do what we want to do afterwards. We don't want to be in a situation where we go to consultation, post-contract, get a raft of brilliant ideas from the public about what we want with our bus shelters, and then find out, well, actually, we signed a 15-year contract last year that says that they don't have to do any of the things that we've said. So there's a very real risk that we lock in an inability to influence anything that happens in that particular design phase. And the third reason on there was the consultation about parish councils, for example, is a very astute reason of pointing out exactly why this calling is absolutely right. The parish councils weren't consulted. They are a major contributor to the infrastructure. It's not clear in any of this that all of the infrastructure in the city was taken on board, rather than just the tight ones in the existing contract that had the highest level of potential income revenue. Those conversations could have been had with the parish councils. The officers weren't able to answer the question about whether or not double taxation, therefore financial liability, applied across those bus shelters anyway. So that's key information that should have been in before we came to that contract, because if we have got financial liability for any of those parish council bus stops, we definitely should have been considering whether to try and lock them into this contract as part of that particular process. So that is absolutely key information that should have been included in that report, as of the liabilities for all of those. So I think on those very simple grounds and the discussion that was had, it's very clear that the decision should be called in.
Thank you. Councillor Ben Burton.
Thank you. I think we've heard a lot of points I'm very supportive of. I just wanted to cover kind of the reasonableness of what we're doing in terms of consultation. I think consultation is very important, but it has to be relevant to what we're actually doing as a contract. If this was about the principle of bus stops, or where bus stops were to be located, or whether we have advertisement on bus stops, which are all things that have been agreed in the public already, and that's understood as a city in many ways, then maybe we could have, but if that wasn't agreed, we could have some kind of My Castle Gateway, My City bus stop consultation that costs hundreds of thousands of pounds and takes in every member of the public and does a massive piece of work around it. But essentially what we're looking at here is the appointment of a supplier to deliver that contract. Now, if every single contract that we put through the council, if we were appointing a building contractor, if we were appointing someone who supplied something, we did such a level of consultation as we're talking about, consulting with everybody. When you're talking about parish councils, they are somebody who operates bus stops in the city, but they operate their own bus stops. They are responsible for them, and this doesn't preclude them from using services extended to this in the future if the council was to put them forward. So I don't think that that's relevant to this. In fact, what Councillor Morley was saying, we should go to them for advice on how to operate a bus stop. Now, I suspect that our officers go and talk to other councils who operate hundreds of bus stops, thousands of bus stops, and get expert advice from them rather than someone who has a small amount of bus stops. And that's not to criticise parishes who do an excellent work in bringing forward bus stops from their own thing, but I think it's about the reasonableness and what people in the city would like to see us spending money on and time on as officers, our officers, to do that, rather than just doing everything for the purpose of that. So I think it's a reasonable approach, essentially.
Thank you. Councillor Nelson.
Thank you, Chair. Coming into this as my first experience of a call-in, I was sort of told quite clearly as we're coming in, the discussion and the meeting is all about the reasons for the call-in. The reasons that have been put on the call-in form are the reasons we're here, not to have all of the conversations about what we would or wouldn't like in this decision, or whether we like the decision or whether we don't like the decision. So I've been sort of slightly confused and a bit disappointed that so much of the actual meeting then has been taken up with the details of what bus stops are made of, or things like I think there's been a lot of references to the advertising strategy, which is again like nothing to do with this call-in, whether people like it or not. Personally, I think that when we have a 10-year life expectancy gap in this city, putting health first is really important, but it's not relevant to the call-in. And yet these decisions seem to have, these sort of conversations seem to have crept into this meeting, and it just doesn't seem appropriate for them to have, there to have been a space for them to be aired here in terms of my understanding of what this meeting was for. But I do feel like it's strange as well. So one of the things that was called in was the conversation about consultation. We've just had a massive consultation about transport. Councillor Lomas has referenced this. The officers have talked about how the big My Transport consultation that just happened, so many people, you know, thousands of residents fed into that. I really hope the parish councils fed into that, and that all of that consultation has been taken into account as part of this decision-making process. So it just seems to me like we're going around in circles where Councillor Eyre is saying consultation wasn't done, even though in the discussion it has been established that that massive piece of consultation that has just been done has been taken into account when this decision has been made. So I refute the idea that consultation hasn't happened, but it's good to know that the executive member is open to discussion with individual members about specific issues which are completely unrelated to the call-in. And I think that Councillor Burton has a really important point. Are we going to start calling in every contract for the plumbing of council buildings because we want to make sure that we're checking the materials that the plumbers might be using before it goes out to tender? It just doesn't seem reasonable. So yeah, that just seems very strange and not quite what I was expecting today.
Thank you. Councillor Waller.
Thank you, Chair. I think what was vital was to ensure that on all of the times that ward councillors had been told that things had taken longer or there'd been delays in responding to requests from residents, which officers within this council who deal with bus shelters found frustrating because of the contract, that this was an opportunity to make sure that all of those aspects were factored in so that we had a contract which was flexible enough to ensure that whatever situation arose in the street, whichever street, could be your ward, could be my ward, anybody's ward, but that there wasn't this inflexibility because of, oh, well, if we thought about that when the contract was awarded, we would have done it differently. So after a long, with a long contract coming to an end, I was frequently told, oh, we can look at this when the new contract comes along. And therefore, it was ensuring that those occasions, so we're not left in the situation where we're just saying, oh, it's because of the contract. Well, this is the opportunity to bring together all of those problems and say, let's get it right, because this is a long-term contract. And I'm not getting the sense of how that has been included in the development of going forward. And I think that it's not to say the groups that the executive member consulted with shouldn't have been consulted with. That's not the question. It's perfectly reasonable to engage with a number of groups about specific issues, about, well, we've got the opportunity to look at bus stop design, but equally, you should include the officers who've been dealing with a lot of these cumulative problems, thinking, well, if this was included in a new contract, then it would make their life easier to respond to councillors and residents. Therefore, that's what I really wanted to get out tonight in terms of communication and consultation. And I'm afraid I haven't received it.
Okay. Any other members wish to make any observations? Councillor Crawshaw.
Just a very simple one, really. The purpose of a call-in is to check that you're satisfied that the decision-making taken by the executive is robust and lawful. And I can't see anything at all in anything that I've heard that suggests to me that the decision-making is not robust and is not lawful. And so I can't see any grounds whatsoever by which this call-in could possibly be upheld. And I think the point's been made by a number of people, but particularly eloquently by Councillor Lomas, that the point of a call-in process is to make sure that we're making robust and lawful decisions. That doesn't mean that you have to like them. There's a different forum for which you can argue about whether or not you like the decisions, but are they robust and lawful? That's what we're here for. And if we're going to spend all of our time talking about whether or not we like the decision or not, that's not the purpose of a call-in.
Thank you. So a few observations from me. I think it's a good thing that the council is going out to tender for the bush shelter contract. It provides opportunities to enhance provision that exists, I think, and the fact the level of interest in the topic suggests that there is a huge degree of interest, and anyone who attends bus forum meetings will know location and style of bus shelter is a really important issue. And as a city that wants to make using public transport easier, more convenient and safer, we all have an interest in that. So I think it's, we're all on the same page in terms of wanting better outcomes. And I think that's where I kind of look at this from in terms of the spec for the new contract. Have we articulated what, from an experience perspective, how we want this contract to deliver the best possible infrastructure for passengers? The mention has been made of sort of parallel consultations, and the big transport conversation was indeed an opportunity for residents, and I'm sure and many others did take part in that. And we know from recent experience there's been investment in digital displays indicating time of next bus, and that's all really good stuff. I take on board Councillor Ben Burton's point around this consultation fatigue and making best use of officer time in terms of what we consult on. But I think there have been some missed opportunities in terms of informing the spec. Obviously, the consultant report, which was, I think, a really interesting piece of work and set out in a great level of detail some of the options and some of the potential opportunities that exist. But I think there has been a missed opportunity. I'm hoping it's not too late for input to be made by members and anyone else who has an interest in making the infrastructure as good as it can be. I think looking at the text of the options presented to executive and the decision that was made, approval for officers to undertake a competitive tendering exercise and award a new 15-year contract, and delegate authority to negotiate and conclude the new concession contract to the Director of Governance in consultation with Head of Procurement. I would have had more confidence if that had included in consultation with relevant executive members as well. And hopefully my concerns are misplaced, but it seems to me that it reads as the closing of a door in terms of further input from members and through members of the public, through the executive member, through a decision session, not to go through the details of contract negotiations. Clearly that would be inappropriate, but to say, we've heard what input residents have had through the various consultations that have taken place. We've looked at it's in terms of how taking into account views of the public. That's what I'm talking about in terms of opportunities for.
That you have just introduced.
No, I'm talking about the opportunities for members of the public to have a say, to inform the spec. That's the point I'm trying to make. And if I'm allowed to conclude, that is my main concern, and I shall end there. Any other members wish to make any further observations? No?
Yes.
Sorry, Councillor Jane Burt.
Just very briefly, in consultation with the disabled community in York, we've been consulted and consulted and consulted till we're blue in the face, and we have actually said that can they just please refer to previous consultations about bus stops and standalone units. So I think, to be fair, that this has been listened to, although I do think it's sort of out of the remit of what we're doing today. I just want to mention that.
Thank you. Any other contributions? Nope. So we move on to the next stage in the process, where each committee member will be asked in turn to state whether they consider that the core principles identified in the call-in request were breached or not, giving reasons if they wish, but please don't feel the need to repeat anything you've already said. So I shall ask Lindsay to read out each person's name in turn alphabetically. So if I can ask you to say breach if you believe there has been a breach of the decision-making principles, or no breach if you believe there has not been a breach in the decision-making principles. Lindsay.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Chair. I restrict my comments to previous comments that if we can get the Constitution to change this to a straight vote as quickly as possible, that would save everybody a lot of time. But my view is breach.
Councillor Ben Burton.
Yeah, no breach.
Councillor Jane Burton.
No breach.
Councillor Crawshaw.
No breach.
Councillor Melly.
No breach.
Councillor Merritt.
No breach.
Councillor Orrell.
Breach.
Councillor Nelson.
No breach.
Councillor Rowley.
No breach.
Councillor Waller.
Breach.
Councillor Wan.
Breach.
Councillor Whitcroft.
No breach.
Chair.
Breach. So on the basis of the answers given, 8 members indicated they felt there's been no breach and 5 indicated there had been a breach. We now have to do this again by a show of hands. So as is required in the Constitution. So if I can ask all those to show who believe there has been a breach, please indicate. And if I can ask those to indicate if they believe there has been no breach. Yeah, so we have a consistency between those two phases. So if the result is no breach, members may, if they wish, continue the meeting to suggest or discuss any areas worthy of future exploration via the scrutiny function. So I would remind members that we're at the stage in the municipal year where chairs of the scrutiny committee are actively looking for items to inform work plans. So if there's anything you've heard this evening that you believe would be worthy of further exploration through scrutiny, please do have a think. I shall give members the opportunity to raise anything now if they wish. No, but if not, if I can encourage members to contribute towards the work planning process for their respective scrutiny committees, particularly economy, place, access and transport. Okay. So that concludes that agenda item. There is no urgent business, so I would like to thank members for their attendance and wish you a good evening.